All right, so there's another piece of Street Fighter content I wanted to show you guys. So if you don't know about Haitani, you should. He's one of the 5 Japanese fighting game gods. He was amazing in the first couple of years of Street Fighter 5, had the best Makoto in Street Fighter 4 and Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. All around amazing fighting game player, one of the best to do it. He came out with this video where he discusses the differences between Street Fighter 5 and Street Fighter 6, and unfortunately it's entirely in Japanese. However, there was a post on Cappuccino, which I would not advise browsing on your work computer, where Generic Remix goes over and translates the major points that Haitani discusses in this video, and it gives Haitani's perspective on it, which is actually really valuable, I believe. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the video on the tab here and go over the discussion and the points brought up by Generic Remix, which I had to vet this guy a little bit first. So he's done both Korean and Japanese translations across Reddit for a long time. I can't vet him beyond the fact that he's done this many times, so take it maybe with a tiny grain of salt, but there's a lot of salient points that were made, and I think that it brings up a really interesting discussion about Street Fighter 5 versus Street Fighter 6 and the direction Street Fighter 6 is going in. All right, so one of the main points that Haitani goes over is that general, neutral, and footsies is that hit confirms are not really a big focus of Street Fighter 6 anymore. So in fact, in Street Fighter 6, a lot of the low forwards you cannot confirm. Like, you just don't have enough of a cancel window, where that's obviously very different in Street Fighter 5, right? So in Street Fighter 5, there's a lot of characters that are built fundamentally around the low forward confirm into the knockdown or into damage. Think Karen with her low forward into Tenku. Think Luke with low forward into the EX launcher move into a full combo. A lot of characters kind of revolve around this. So in Street Fighter 6, because the cancel timing, it does not really line up to allow for a human to actually hit confirm a low forward. So instead, you actually will rely more on preemptive buffers, right? So you're not gonna be able to hit confirm. You're just gonna have to kind of commit to the buffer in neutral if you think they're gonna press a button and get clipped by your normal, or if you think they're gonna walk into that space. However, that ends up being countered by things like drive impact, because if you do a normal into a special and you actually clipped their drive impact startup, that buffer will occur and your drive impact will end up absorbing your special buffer and punishing you in return. And that's something that I noticed right away with the first beta. I mentioned that in my beta review, so I definitely agree with that observation from Haitani. When I was playing Jamie, a lot of the time I would end up doing things like low forward into Rekka, but when people were drive impact happy, you would do low forward into Rekka, and then the drive impact would just absorb your Rekka and you would just die. So there was a bit of risk involved with doing that buffer. He also mentions all the buttons for all the characters in Street Fighter 6 have longer reach, making it easier to hit the opponents. It takes a while to get all the way up to the opponents and hit them with a button in Street Fighter 5 due to the screen being wider in relation to the cast buttons. This means the constant doing nothing while stuttering, shimmying back and forth in neutral that we see in Street Fighter 5 is less likely to be seen in Street Fighter 6. So that's true, the buttons do have a lot more reach. I'm not sure how this will play out in the end. One thing about Street Fighter 6, the actual gameplay that I experienced during the beta, is that because people were bad at the game at the time, you ended up having a lot of this sort of walk back and forth in footsies where people were fishing for whiff punishes. So it's funny the perspective that you're going to see during this discussion. Haitani characterizes Street Fighter 5 as a very slow-paced defensive game. Street Fighter 5 has this reputation for being very rushed down, like oppressive offense, especially in the American scene and a lot of, like, I think mid to low level players, which I don't think the game is like that, especially at a high level, because people react to everything you do. And it ends up making the game very neutral heavy, where people are looking for the one whiff punish or the one hit confirm in order to get the party started. And then once you get the knockdown, then you can apply safe pressure. But the neutral involves a lot of walk and block and bulldogging in and out of ranges. So that's the perspective that Haitani is coming from, that Street Fighter 5 is reliant on slow neutral. But he's saying that in Street Fighter 6, because it's going to be easier to reach people, you're going to see less of that happening because people are going to be making contact with each other more often. So I didn't see that personally during the gameplay, but it makes sense. You're actually going to be able to make contact with each other. But I think in the meta right now, people were still feeling each other out. So They were just simply kind of walking back and forth, doing exactly what he's talking about is not going to happen later down the road in Street Fighter 6. So he continues on to say, Street Fighter 5 has a lot of bulldogging, walking up a tiny bit at a time, and blocking because it's harder to get in versus zoning in Street Fighter 5 due to overall smaller buttons. However, in Street Fighter 6, this sort of strategy will become weaker due to Drive Rush, since Drive Rush can suddenly get in on the opponent from mid-range and make you choose between high and low. And he shows some examples of that. So right there in this example, you can see him, he's just in neutral, and then he just activates Drive Rush here in the top right corner and goes in, goes for the overhead, and the overhead will become safe on block and also give a combo because of the enhanced frame data from the Drive Rush, and you get the conversion from that. Or he could have Drive Rushed up and gone low, right? So there is an inherent mix-up to that approach. Obviously, it can be parried, it can be jab checked if you react to it in time, but it covers a lot of range and happens pretty fast, so it can catch people off guard. And then even there, after getting the, you saw in this example, he gets the overhead from full screen, gets the combo, and then goes to the meaty low forward to set up another Drive Rush cancel into a high-low mix-up again. So there are ways, if you're using your Drive Rush, to stick to the opponent and get in quick. I do agree to an extent that in Street Fighter 5, you don't really have that to the same degree. You can try dashing up, but at those distances, you're going to have to do like double dash. And at high level, people tend to check a lot of these dashes. There are obviously special moves in Street Fighter 5 that people complain about, that people throw out from full screen, things like EX dash straight, EX tackle, but that's limited on a per character basis. So it's not the entire cast that plays like that. Meanwhile, Drive Rush is going to actually be universal. So every character will have access to this sort of mix-up. I do agree that I think as the game progresses, people will stick to each other a little bit more. During the betas, people were feeling each other out a lot, so it's pretty slow gameplay. I do think Street Fighter 6 will speed up, where Street Fighter 5 had the opposite happen. I think Street Fighter 5, as it progressed, it slowed down at high level as people learn how to react and check everything. But Street Fighter 6, I think as people learn the Drive Rush system, it has the potential to speed up. So in this section, too, he goes over Whiff Punishes. Street Fighter 6 has made it much easier to Whiff Punish. In Street Fighter 5, medium attacks have short recoveries, and hurt boxes mostly do not extend forward, which make them very difficult to Whiff Punish in Street Fighter 6. However, not only have the animations of these moves become bigger, but the hurt boxes extend forward, making them easier to Whiff Punish. This means that constant zoning with low recovery buttons have become weaker in Street Fighter 6. This makes it easier to progress a match against constant zoning and will likely reduce the number of situations where neither side wants to do anything and the match devolves into a stalemate. It's interesting that he uses the word stalemate there. He's referring to this sort of neutral where people are fishing with the quick mediums, which it ties into the hit confirm ability, right? Ken sitting around and poking with crouching medium kick is definitely real because he can hit confirm this to EX Tatsu, hit confirm this into Shoryuken, get momentum, confirm into super, get damage, or get Oki. So it is real, and it is very difficult to whiff punish. You can't effectively stand outside of its range where it will whiff, because when you do that, you won't be in a range to whiff punish. Meanwhile, in Street Fighter 6, it's much easier to do that due to a combination of extended hurt boxes after the active frames, and because the buttons themselves have more range and have more recovery. It's easier to catch someone whiffing a low forward, as this example shows here, right? You can clip from much further away and get an effective whiff punish in Street Fighter 6. So I do agree that at high level with these confirmed characters, it did get a little obnoxious. I guess calling it a stalemate could be one way to look at it. I do know the pain of going up against a really good Ken player or a really good Karen player, and they're poking away with crouching medium kick, and how difficult it was to actually whiff punish and stop that. But you know, the moment you walked into that range, you're going to get clipped by that move. You're going to eat a decent chunk of damage and get raise your stun and get moved to the corner, where then you have to take a throw mix-up, and you're probably going to take the throw next, right? So not every character played that way, but it was a pretty common theme amongst the higher tier characters, and amongst the higher skilled players, they would have that play style. And I wasn't a huge fan of that, to be honest. I do like the neutral in Street Fighter 5, but I'm not a huge fan of the fishing for the low confirm into the Oki. So to me personally, seeing that be a little bit weaker, or at least have more risk so that it's easier to whiff punish across the majority of the cast, I do like that. And also, like, one thing to drive this point home, we can look at the frame data between these characters across games. So let's look at Ryu and Street Fighter V on the left here, with Ryu and Street Fighter 6 on the right. And you can already see the differences in the stats here, just before I even get into the specific moves. Ryu in Street Fighter V, his forward dash is 16 frames, backdash 21. In Street Fighter 6, it's 19 frames, backdash 23. So you can already see that they made the forward dash 3 frames slower. So they're already slowing down the dashes a little bit here. But let's use crouching medium kick as an example. So on the left, once again, is Street Fighter V. On the right is going to be Street Fighter 6. So here you see startup 6 frames, active 3 frames, recovery 13. So it takes 6 frames for the move to actually become active, and then it has 13 frames of recovery. In Street Fighter 6, it has 8 frames of startup, 3 active frames, and then 19 frames of recovery. There's 6 more frames of recovery. Total 21 frames for crouching medium kick in Street Fighter V, 29 frames total in Street Fighter 6. Even if you account for the difference with the startup frame, you still have 6 more frames to react to the whiff crouching medium kick, which 6/60ths of a second doesn't sound like much, but in fighting game terms for reactions, that's actually a really big deal. Another thing to keep in mind about the frame data difference, which will come into another point Haitani makes, things on block are more negative in general in this game. So on block, it's -6. Here on block, it's -1 in Street Fighter V. So you'll see Ken and Karen players do that. They'll do crouching medium kick, you block it, then you stand up for a second to get out of the range because you want to get away from them, because you know in the low forward range you're in the danger zone, but then they just do it again, and then they clip you trying to stand up and walk away, they confirm it, and then you're in the blender, right? So in Street Fighter 6, if you block their crouching medium kick, it's your turn. And in general, for almost every normal in the game, except for a few mediums, they're negative on block if they're not enhanced by drive. So you can always pretty much take your turn back after every move, so you're not going to be pinned down by the low forward fishing for a confirm in Street Fighter 6. So you can see the example he shows here. Re-whiffing crushing medium kick gets hit by this Ken sweep. It's just much easier to do in Street Fighter 6. So it's interesting he says that people won't stalemate. I think people are going to be more concerned about whiffing. So we'll see how that plays out. Drive rush will prevent you from whiffing because you can get in and build offense. But I also think that people are going to be more concerned about whiffing in this game than even in Street Fighter 5. All right, so this is the third section, and in this one, the translation continues. Putting your opponents in the corner is good. Street Fighter 6 rewards you more than Street Fighter 5 does for putting people in the corner. First, you can throw loop people in the corner. Second, drive impact. Impact can wall splat even if you block. So it becomes a thing where you're forced to react to and counter DI with your own DI. So it becomes much harder to hold on and survive. Since pushing people to the corner is much more rewarding, sitting back and watching what the opponent does / safely blocking will be weaker in Street Fighter 6 compared to Street Fighter 5. I can agree to that, for sure. The corner in Street Fighter 6 is death, 100%. DI causing a wall splat combo, even if they block it, means they constantly have to be paying attention to the DI, which adds a whole load to their mental stack, which makes the other offensive pressure that you go for very powerful. Throw loops are in Street Fighter 6. Like, you 100% have canned throw loops that you can easily do. You just throw, dash up, throw, and that will beat buttons and, you know, stop people from escaping the corner. However, if people throw tech in Street Fighter 6, that wasn't mentioned here, throw tech is actually much more powerful in Street Fighter 6 because when you successfully tech a throw in this situation, there is a lot of pushback. So if you throw tech somebody when you're in the corner, they get pushed much further away than Street Fighter 5. If you tech a throw in Street Fighter 5 in the corner, nothing changed for you. You are still in the corner. In Street Fighter 6, if you tech a throw, you actually get some reward. You actually build space, you get to play more neutral, you get to fight your way out of the corner. So that's one thing to keep in mind with the throw loop situation. However, the fact that DI is such a present threat means you're gonna die. So currently in the corner, it's pretty funny because people are so desperate to get out of the corner that people are jumping and they're doing any kind of scramble they possibly can to get out of the corner. I think when offense gets cleaned up a lot more and people are much better at checking the escape options and stopping the jump out, you're gonna see how bad the corner is, which is funny because people already say that about Street Fighter 5. People say Street Fighter 5 corner is terrible, and it is. It's really bad, but it might be worse than 6. All right, section number 4. In this one, he goes over the differences in the DP Dragon Punches. from Street Fighter 5 to Street Fighter 4. So in Street Fighter 5 for Ryu, the light punch DP has frames 1 through 3 throw invincible, medium punch is 1 through 6 air invincible, and then heavy punch 3 through 6 frames are strike and fireball invincible. And that's how Oro's works. A lot of other characters kind of follow that pattern where each DP has a specific use in Street Fighter 5, but in Street Fighter 6, that is gone away. Instead, in Street Fighter 6, every single Dragon Punch is air invul on frame 1, but doesn't have any other invincibility. So they're all anti-airs. They might have different spaces that they cover, but they're all used specifically for anti-airs. You can't use it against on a throw or on a frame trap. And then you must use the overdrive, the EX version, to get the invincibility. Haitani goes into this and says, this means that stuff like doing light DP read versus throws in Street Fighter 5 is no longer possible, which strengthens the corner Oki. You can do drive EXDP in Street Fighter 6 with full invul, but not only do you use up to 2 drive gauges just to do the drive DP to begin with, but if it gets blocked into a full punish, you usually lose around a total of 5 drive gauges. So there's a huge amount of risk to drive DPing. The max drive gauge is 6 bars, right? So if you lose 5 of your drive gauges, you're about to go into burnout or you're in burnout. Yeah, you can lose a lot of drive meter. So basically he's getting at DPs are worse in this game. And that was a funny comment to see because people in that thread were already complaining about that. There's still people that are hung up on DPs not being fully invincible like they were in Street Fighter 4. And I, for one, do not miss that at all. I think that it's a-okay. I think it's totally fine to just spend meter if you want invincibility. Like, think about Street Fighter 5 Ken. What do you think about when you think of Street Fighter 5 Ken? You think of nuttiness, you think of random DPs, you think of all this crazy offense that you can't control. People still associate Street Fighter 5 Ken with random Shoryuken, EX or otherwise. And in Street Fighter 5, only the EX one is fully invincible. The heavy one has frame 3 invincibility, so it can go through certain strings, but you can mediate if they wake up with it. But think about Street Fighter 4 Ken, fully invincible DP in Street Fighter 4. Ken was known for just mashing DP over and over and over. And yeah, there was like, it was endearing to a degree, and people, look back on it and laugh. And there's the flowchart Ken that became a community defining meme that brought people together, and it became a funny thing. But is that really like the way you want the game to be represented to people who are new to the game? Just mashing DP, and when you're a beginner, countering people who are mashing fully invincible DPs over and over, it's very difficult because the risk reward is not in their favor. When you do an invincible DP as a beginner, the person punishing you will either do a really bad punish, which won't do much damage, and your DP might do more damage on hit than the punish you will take, or they won't punish at all. They'll miss their punish, and then you do another DP, and then while they're messing up their punish, they eat another Shoryuken. I just think the design wasn't that great. It encouraged really sloppy gameplay, and not every Street Fighter has had fully invincible DPs. That's not always been a thing. It was a thing in Street Fighter 4, so I don't really mind that. Like, just spend the meter to get full invincibility. I think it's totally fine. I think it's better for low level play. I think it makes it so that the game is less intimidating to learn and not as frustrating for people. Sure, the Ken players might be missing out on mashing, but I think for people trying to counter that play, it becomes much more understandable when they only get that option if they burn bar for it. And there's actually a risk to it because the meter is such a resource. So it becomes an immediately apparent mind game of, I will spend this valuable resource to gain an advantage, but I am risking losing this resource and being put into burnout, right? It's a mind game that is easily understood to people at all levels. But for Dragon Punches, you can explain it as much as you want. If you bait the DP, hit them really hard and punish them, but their hands can't follow through. It's just, they can't do it. It makes the game really sloppy at low levels. So I don't know. I am totally fine with saying, hey, spend meter to make your DP invincible. It will make the corner a lot more dangerous, sure, but not a big deal to me. I know many will disagree. All right, here we go into section number 5 here. And in the translation, it goes into specials/command normals. Compared to Street Fighter 5, specials in Street Fighter 6 have overall shorter recovery. There are quite a lot of special moves that would have been punishable in Street Fighter 5, but are no longer so in Street Fighter 6. One example is Ryu's forward medium punch overhead. In Street Fighter 5, the startup is 22 frames, -7 on block, can be punished. In Street Fighter 6, the startup is 20 frames, but -3 on block cannot be punished, and the startup is faster. This makes it quite a bit better to use buttons that are meant to mix up the opponent and break their guard. Another example is Zeku's command dash into overhead, which is -5 on block, and punishable versus Kimberly's move of the same sort, which is -3 on block. Since many of these are not punishable on block in Street Fighter 6, you would instead utilize the new drive parry, impact, perfect parry system to counter the moves and to create some risk for using these moves. So this is a pretty interesting point to bring up, because we just showed how the frame data for regular normals is actually significantly worse, if you would, in Street Fighter 6, right? Like, normals in Street Fighter 6 generally have more startup, they have more recovery, they have bigger hurt boxes. On the other hand, moves that are designed to mix you up, like overheads, are faster and safer on block. So that's how you're meant to break guard. So in Street Fighter 5, the way you break someone's defense is you constantly pressure them with the threat of walk-up throw. So when I use Oro and I press stand medium kick, which is +3 on block, and then I do another standing medium kick, why are people getting hit? What is the threat there? The threat is, after that stand medium kick, there's a chance that I might walk into you and then throw you. So to counter that, you would have to press a jab to interrupt me while I walk in. But instead, the mind game is, what if I just do another standing medium kick on plus on block? I'm going to counter hit your jab, and I'm going to get a combo from it, right? That's the basic Street Fighter 5 flowchart right there. So that does not exist in Street Fighter 6 for the most part, unless you use Drive Rush, because all your buttons are going to be negative on block, and at best, like, some mediums are +1, so you don't really get much of a frame trap after. However, in Street Fighter 5, overheads are pretty bad for the most part. They're very reactable, and they're punishable on block, right? And you don't have a way to make them safe for the most part. There's not really a good on-the-fly high-low mix-up in Street Fighter 5. The strike-throw mix-up is what you go for in Street Fighter 5. However, in Street Fighter 6, because I think the frame data is so poor, unless you spend resources, it does instead give a lot more ways to open people up with high-lows. So Ryu's overhead is faster, and it's also safe on block, right? You can just sprinkle it in. Kimberly's overhead, like Zeku's, is now safer on block, so she can go for it. She's negative, sure, you can take your turn back, but you're incentivized to go for these overheads more in Street Fighter 6 as well. So you can sprinkle in more ways to constantly pressure people and break their guard. Instead of walking up for the throw with frame traps, you can go for high lows and pokes and things of that nature, right? So definitely a difference in approach there with the frame data. Here we have section 6. This is for fireballs and their overall strength. This is mainly in relation to Ryu Ken, Haitani's most used characters during the Street Fighter 6 closed beta, but anti-fireball moves are extremely weak in Street Fighter 6 at this point in time. In Street Fighter 5, if you include EX moves, there are quite a lot of anti-fireball moves in the game. On top of that, if you use V-Shift, a universal system, that any character can properly respond to fireballs. In Street Fighter 6, there are usually no anti-fireball moves. The ones that do have those properties are usually super art, so it's not very strong. This seems like it would mean that fireballs will overall be strong in Street Fighter 6. Of course, stuff like this can be changed, however, they want via character balance patches, so we won't know until release, but in the betas, due to this general environment, Ryu was quite strong. I'll say overall, I do agree that fireballs are super strong right now in Street Fighter 6. So in Street Fighter 5, there are tons of moves for lots of characters to counter fireballs. I mean, you know, I played ROG, right? You just press V-Skill 1, it negates most fireball types in the game. So they don't really have that currently in this game. Jamie has an EX, like his EX breakdance kicks moves, which is fireball invincible, but the startup is super slow that you can't use it on reaction to the fireball. So that means you have to guess, and it's not a good guess. And if you're going to guess, what you would instead do is drive impact. So I think that is the design philosophy here with Street Fighter 6, and it's not touched on, at least in this translation here. You can drive impact projectiles, right? So for Guile, I think it's completely impossible to react to the Sonic Boom and then actually punish him with the DI. If you try to react to Sonic Boom and then drive impact it, they will have time to drive impact in return and punish you. But I'm pretty sure with Ryu or Ken, some of the fireballs you can react to with DI. I could be wrong on that, don't take that as law. However, regardless, there is a risk reward here because I can just guess drive impact on the fireball. However, guessing drive impact is very risky because you can just eat a drive impact in return if they didn't throw a fireball then, and you'll eat a full combo instead. So it's pretty interesting. I'm not sure how this balances out in the end. because when I really think about it, even from the first beta to the second beta, the level 1 supers, the level 1 CAs, they were fireball invincible in the first beta, and they got rid of that in the second one. So in the second one, you can only use mostly your level 3 CAs to get through fireballs, which is pretty tough because you're going to have like one of those a game. And even then, the range is not always that far. So fireballs currently feel extremely strong, especially Guile. I cannot emphasize enough how strong Guile's fireballs feel. Obviously, there's things like parry to try to counter. You can try to perfect parry to gain ground. And maybe when people improve their perfect parry timing, people will be much more consistently parrying projectiles and then gaining the ground. So instead of just walk and block, you can walk, perfect parry, walk forward, block, and bully them to the corner a little bit like that. So there is more to investigate. So I think there's a chance for this to change with just people improving at the game. But currently, right now, yes, I totally agree that fireballs feel very strong in this version of the game. In closing thoughts, he says that overall, it seems likely that Street Fighter 6 will reward more aggressive play compared to the type of waiting in neutral that you see in Street Fighter 5. So once again, interesting perspective. I think to the average FGC member who knows of Street Fighter 5, they tend to always say that Street Fighter 5 is super aggressive. And I don't think it is. I think at higher level play, Street Fighter 5 definitely slows down a lot. So I see where he's coming from for sure. My personal experience with Street Fighter 6 was there was a ton of waiting in neutral, but I can see Haitani's vision here because I think that's just because we were bad at the game. I think whenever a game comes out and everyone's new and bad at the game, it feels like, oh, this game is so neutral heavy. This game is all about neutral. It's totally back to footsies and neutral. That's what everyone says about every Street Fighter game when it's brand new. So Haitani is trying to predict the future here of how the meta will evolve and how the tools in the game will influence the way we optimize it. And I mostly agree with what he's saying. I definitely see potential for more aggressive play. Drive rush, burnout state, the drive meter. There's lots of mechanics in the game that force you to make a move because sitting back will allow the other player to take the initiative and put himself in advantage, right? There's lots of systems to encourage that. What do you guys think? I'm done preaching.